On this week's episode of Tales from the Hellenic Frontier, we reach the famous Drachma War, a conflict that engulfed the Mediterranean at the beginning of the 2nd century BC. How did the long-lasting Pax Massalia break down? What triggered those first acts of aggression between historic allies? The answer lies in the humble Massalian drachma. The coin, used to facilitate trade throughout the empire, had become the subject of a worldwide controversy. In Massalia, the age of the executors was coming to an end, with the deaths of Eusebius, Artemius, Cretius and Bendis all marking a transition from large territories administered by their conquerors to smaller fiefs split up between a large number of officials, coming from both the Timucoi and the increasingly influential Massalian city council. The increased size of the Timucoi and the lack of clear leadership created an undertone of worry amongst its members. The vast majority were inexperienced and knew only that continuing aggressive wars was no longer an option. Aside from that, the question of how to continue the rise of the Republic lay open. From left field came Eutychus, a respected Timucoi official who had, despite no particular aptitude for campaigning, won fame as a general in the wars of Northern Europe. He suggested that the Massalian drachma become the official currency under which all trade be conducted, even with powers who did not circulate the currency. Whether the idea was presented as a serious measure is lost to the translation of historical writers, but what we do know is that the idea infected the Timucoi with a dream of ruling the world not by the sword but by the abacus, a weapon their enemies could never take away from them. In the spring of 198 BC, the tentative proposals of unified currency found themselves becoming Massalian law, passed by the Peak of Olympus and the bandwagoning council chamber, despite vocal opposition from highly influential members such as Heraclides. At first there was little change. The currency was in such short supply that it was impossible for many of Massalia's trading partners to follow these new laws. The extremeness of the measure compounded with this impossibility to make it come across as some kind of joke. Surely Massalia could not expect for such an upheaval to be successful. Doubts were common in the Timucoi, this we know, but when powers refused to participate in the deal, they simply became more convinced that it was worthwhile, pushing the terms ever harder. Sparta, Massalia's closest military ally, was the only major power able to comply with the demands, although they did so with much reluctance on their own part. For Carthage, the Illyrian Confederation, and the Ptolemaic Empire, it was not worth the hassle. They continued business as usual and left the matter up to Massalia to press further or ignore. But so ingrained was the idea that the drachma was the key to Massalia's future power, the notion of ignoring the project was never recorded to have been formally discussed. The decision was made that those who did not accept their terms should be punished. The method of doing this was to gradually repeal the benefits of Massalian alliance, with the only way to buy them back being to enact laws in accordance with the drachma regulations. In the winter of 198 BC, the first blow was struck against Carthage, with their right to move troops through Massalian lands being cut off. They quickly did the same in turn, leaving both powers with territory no longer connected to their cause via land routes. Relations remained steady, as did the determination of Carthage to let Massalia's scheming peter out. The example made of them failed to convince the Illyrians or the Egyptians either, and so the Timucoi voted to double down. In the summer of 197 BC, military access was repealed with both Illyria and Egypt, forcing many military resources to be relocated and lines between their occupied territories to be cut, no small punishment. But it only served to increase the image of Massalia as a bully. Rather than intimidating their rivals, they were simply fueling their resentment, although still there was enough goodwill and reliance on Massalian trade that plans to retaliate were unwritten if they were formed at all. The council, although supporting the policy tacitly, were quick to try and repair relations and placate any foreign diplomats they could tear away from the Peak. It must have seemed to these visitors that Massalia's internal politics was far from the unified front it had been under their executors, and they would have been quite right to think this. For all their efforts and all the willingness of the offending powers to resume positive relations, the Timucoi hardline was drawn ever further. The next level of sanction was unleashed, ending the alliance with Egypt in the late autumn of 197 BC, and then in the spring of the following year, ending military cooperation with Illyria as well. Thanks to the hard lobbying of Heraclides, the Timucoi were convinced at least to make some efforts to restore relations with Illyria. But pacts of trust meant little when the machines behind the Drachma laws were still running at full speed. Almost inevitably, in the autumn of 196 BC, the historical military alliance with Carthage was torn up, prompting a wave of hostility throughout the Punic colonies. Whether Carthage had ever planned to adopt the Drachma, they had by now been too offended to let the matter go Massalia's way. The Cold War continued, and negotiations over the matter almost stopped. The only agreement was that no agreement would be forthcoming, and yet the Timucoi continually insisted that they would not endorse a compromise solution. Driven by a kind of groupthink, they had become internally convinced that the hostility meeting them at every door was a sign of weakness, a bluff that would pass if pressure was applied sufficiently. Trade, all the while, was continuing as before, with talk of the Drachma being in jest for the most part. But in 194 BC, the atmosphere would begin to change yet further. Heraclides, the most powerful man in Massalia by that time, and a tireless campaigner for unity between the world's powers, passed away. At the same time, Epaphroditos, a man of some fame by his widely known association with Cretheus, defected from the Timucoi to join the dissenting voices among the council. Although it may have seemed noble, the Timucoi was now more filled with pro-Drachma voices than ever, and the rhetoric they used planning their strategy for its adoption became more hostile. In the summer of 194 BC, their threats suddenly became a lot less empty. With Carthage outright refusing to trade by Massalia's rules, they cut off trading rights entirely, at loss to both sides. It was a measure many had feared would be resorted to, representing the first real damage to the cycle of prosperity that Massalia had championed. At first, the strategy seemed to work. Carthage sent word agreeing that they would collect a reserve of drachma from Massalia in order to begin circulating it to their traders. The Timucoi were overjoyed and arranged the monies at once, although they were careful to arrange the pickup from the ports of Genua, not trusting the large fleet required to guard such a payload to come so close to Massalia itself. Concealed from their knowledge, however, was a conspiracy of the African kingdoms to side with Carthage in a show of force, attempting to end the madness. They all pledged to break their military relations with Massalia as soon as the goals of the conspiracy had been achieved. At Genua, on a bright day in the late summer of 194, a Carthaginian fleet approached the sleepy docks, ready to make the short journey inland to Mediolanum, where the stock of coinage had been prepared. But to the citizens watching from the town, it was quickly obvious that something was wrong. The Carthaginians were not sailing for the docks, but for the beaches further along the coast. Their craft were brazenly run aground on those beaches, with the troops inside pouring out. The ships were heavily damaged by the rapid beaching. It was clear that Carthage had no intention of returning home peacefully. Swords in hands, their men looked out at the mountainous lands of Cisalpina before them, the deep-rooted core of the Massalian Republic. Without much more thought, they turned to Genua and advanced, horns blaring, banners held high. The Massalians scrambled together the town's local militia companies, but against a highly trained force with the element of surprise, their chances were slim. It was time for the first blood of the Drachma Wars to be spilt. Hello again and welcome back now to Massalia Tales. In the previous episode we met the various generals who were taking over after the death of our leading figures such as Bendis and Cretheus. We now have many not particularly powerful officers to play with. We also reviewed the situation with a possible glitch in the game that was making the endgame a little difficult and what the plan was going to be to try and overcome that difficulty. On the campaign action front, we saw Actor coming from the steppe to attack the hordes of the steppe who had been created by Arakosia. The enemy had a big advantage theoretically in battle, but after a long and very messy micro-heavy fight, we managed to beat out the enemy's troops using our superior numbers of horse archers. We also saw our last engagement with Hyostan simply overrunning the troops we had under siege, that siege commanded by Epiphroditos. Troops lost were high, but the war came to an end at that point as Bactria finished Hyostan off, and that meant we're actually at peace across all of our fronts. It seemed an age of peace was about to take place, but we now know that lasted only a few years. As Carthage begin their surprise attack, things aren't looking good, but some silver lining is that the enemy's general, who is normally an elephant unit, is now just a small javelin unit because they're landing their troops from the sea, so that's fantastic news. Don't have to deal with an elephant charge. It also means that since they're exposed and just standing there, and for some reason want to come up and join the regular javeliniers in the opening skirmish, I can have my archers firing at them to do some damage. Their javelins are of course going to be doing damage in turn to my militia, who are just trying to take the shots and not move right now because we're in a good position. And fortunately, the enemy's general unit actually routed from losses taken to the return archer fire. You can see they've already lost half their men and more just being cut down as these arrows chase them off. So I'm really hoping here we can get a volley onto the general himself. There he is. He's got an arrow sticking out the back of his neck and he's got a limp. He's covered in blood. So obviously he's been hit already, but his health was not quite depleted, unfortunately. More of his guards being cut down, the men he's leaving behind dying quickly. Another arrow hits him, a massive pool of blood all over the floor. There's another one, somehow still surviving these hits. He's probably quite heavily armoured, so it's possible these arrows aren't actually doing much damage to him. So unfortunately, that general is going to escape, which is annoying because he's a really high level officer, and of course because his death would have reduced the enemy's morale in this battle, although they have a lot of units that aren't affected by the loss of the general as a morale shock. So anyway, with that out of the way, the main battle is just about going to start. Their cavalry, who also have to come in without their mounts, are going to come and fight in melee, but they're actually pretty good in melee, so they'll be able to do fine in that engagement. On the other side of town, they came in with these mercenary Scutarii. Only one unit though attacking the whole southern front of the town, so I had 2 units and 2 units of archers who were able to combat them. So that's going to make things quite easy. The rain of arrows will reduce their numbers, and I can surround them with the militia to make sure their morale goes down a little bit faster. So hoping we'll be able to win that tiny bit of the fight. The rest of the fight's still yet to start. Some troops haven't even landed yet, as you can see, landing way away from the battle, not going to show up until much later. Now I had to abandon my initial position here and move back into a different alleyway because the enemy looked like they were going to outflank the place where I was fighting those dismounted cav. Most of the enemy's infantry are these guys, these Punic swords I think they're called, or Carthaginian swords. They're basically like a Roman Principe unit. They're very strong, armoured, good in melee. They're ever so slightly weaker than Massalia's legionaries, which is the rough equivalent unit. So once we go toe-to-toe with them with legionaries, we might be okay, but right now, these enemy swordsmen going toe-to-toe with my militia, obviously that's not going to be good. So they're going to start the process of hacking through my men. We can form the phalanx to make that process a lot slower, but we can't really stop it unless we can win some victories elsewhere. Those Scutarii swords are going to go down eventually. We've managed to deplete them, and our troops rout them and finish them off, basically destroying that entire unit. So that frees up 2 units of militia for us to use. Not that militia are particularly powerful, but that's going to increase our chances. So I'm going to move those units to go and fight on the main front. So you can see the enemy have started a new front on the north side of the town there, attacking with similar units. Where they first started their attack with the swords, you can see the phalanx has been totally broken up for whatever reason, and the enemy now fighting in a more open melee where they're going to be even more successful at bringing our men down. Outside of town, I had 2 units of mob, and one of them managed to catch a unit of dismounted cav out here, and things were actually going surprisingly well. The dismounted cav, at least this unit in particular, wasn't able to fight very well, so the mob were doing a good job. And in order to help them out, the other unit of mob is coming for a deadly rear attack, rushing across the hills. They arrive actually after another unit of enemy dismounted cav arrive, so it's now 2 units of cav on foot versus 2 units of mob, and we actually managed to rout one of those units of cav, which is completely unexpected. I was really just doing this just to distract these units, but actually managing to defeat one there with the mob is fantastic news. So we're going to get some extra kills as they try and leave. The mob stats so low, going to be hard to kill even a routing fighting unit, but a good job. Perhaps we can rout the other one as well, but unfortunately the actual main fight in the town is going abysmally. The enemy's far superior troops simply cut mine down and start pushing in. They have numerical advantage and the advantage of sheer strength, so not much we can do here to stop them just annihilating these militia lines and getting inside, and that's of course going to allow them to outflank more and more of our men. A couple of militia units held on for a really long time, right until the end of the battle here. So you can see we've just got this choke point holding off the advance of the enemy. The same thing on the victory point, just about stopping them from capturing it. Outside the fight, some archers who were out of ammo went to hunt enemy archers and actually managed to defeat one of their units in melee, so that was good. I ordered them to chase them down into the rout to try and get as many kills as possible, but at this point the hoplites fighting in the town chain routed, so that is going to cause a close defeat. Not exactly a result that we didn't expect, and we did manage to do some damage to the enemy, but it looks like Carthage's first assault on our territory has been pretty effective.
Signal the ships. The colonists can land now. You know, I do not envy these men for being forced to live here. Cisalpina has been doomed to the fate of war by its masters, but they are only criminals after all. No tragedy there. These locals will quickly meet the men at whose expense the Massalian prosperity was had. If there wasn't more business to take care of, I would stay here to watch it happen. It is a glorious thing to see justice restored to the world. Massalia will finally be shut up and straightened out, or perhaps if those meek politicians will listen to me, we shall simply conquer this deviant republic. They've been scheming for years on how to bring us to our knees. Now, I say let us scheme the same in return.
From the battle results, we can see that disappointingly we only actually took down one full Carthaginian unit. I really hope those swords at least would go as well. Their general so nearly dead. Really unfortunate we didn't get him there, but anyway, they are going to come in and capture Genoa and immediately set foot onto our lands. The question is, do they have anything else up their sleeves? They've got a fleet movement, but we don't see any other army movements, although we can't see most of their territory, so that doesn't mean loads of stacks haven't just come up to the border. So there's the confirmation that our army is destroyed, and there's the Sacred Company with a lot of their troops restored. They've got pretty good replenishment by the looks of things, so they're still pretty strong. They're also back up to 20 units, so I think they may have recruited a mercenary unit. Perhaps that's the one I can't see because the rest of their units look Iberian. So we've got our army nearby under Cleandros, the shield of the city, and I was just comparing the stats and seeing that basically, as I mentioned earlier, our legionaries are a little bit better than their mainline infantry. Our Royal Hoplites are a lot better. Royal Hoplite is one of the strongest units in the game, so I'm hoping that on sheer heavy infantry advantage, our best army there will be able to do well. But we've got other armies to look at. We've got Eurysthenes and the Beacons of the Desert. The question for him is, does he go to Mauritania to defend our border with Carthage there, or does he focus on Iberia where he already is? We've also got Kronos here leading our western fleet, and there's actually a Carthaginian army at sea nearby. That's a fantastic opportunity to have a very advantageous battle and take down that army before it does whatever it's doing. But first, for Eurysthenes, I decided I would focus on Iberia and push up towards Massalia to try and clear Carthage out of the area nearest to our core. So the first step is going to be to just cross over the border, basically. We can't attack the hilariously named settlement just there, but we are able to just sit in their territory, which might trigger their army just to the north to come and fight us, so we can get them out of the way. Now you might remember that as part of my little challenge rules, I need to be at war with the other Mediterranean powers as well, so we're going to try and arrange that, and that means breaking all of our treaties with Illyria and Egypt. And basically what I'm going to do is see if they declare war on me, and if they don't, in 1 or 2 turns we will declare war on them, because I think a straight Carthage-Massalia war is going to go in our favour, because we do have the advantage. We're the bigger empire, sorry, with more money and more troops, so we need to get more people involved. So there we go, all the treaties broken, and we'll see what happens, but let's do the rest of this turn for now. I'm going to be moving troops down from the northern part of Europe to come and join the battle with Carthage and potentially Illyria, so bringing down the claws of the peak under Nothus, and also bringing down Eusticus that I didn't show. So next, we're going to have a look at this navy, because as I said, this is a real opportunity to actually just take down this army, since armies have a massive disadvantage at the sea, and as you can see, the balance bar so far in our favour as we come into battle. This is a fantastic little setup here. The enemy's army not even that powerful, does have elephants and a decent general in it, so this is a nice chance to get rid of them. It's a heroic victory in the auto-resolve, easy peasy. Most of their army wiped out just like that. So with one fell stroke we've massively weakened Carthage's military, and they sail away but they don't sail very far, so we can literally just go and kill the rest of those units as well, which is excellent news, especially because their general actually sneakily got away there. So we're going to kill this high level officer. And there we have it. So more experience for Kronos and level ups for the Vengeance of Atlantis as well. So if there's more naval battles coming, that will be useful. And we have seen Carthage using a lot of navies throughout the entire campaign. They've been moving back and forth across the Mediterranean, so I believe they do have a lot of ships. We'll have to watch out for them. So next up, we need to try and do something about their invasion of Genua, and that means the shields of the city who've been waiting for just such an emergency as this to finally move out. Cleandros going to be put to the test as we go up against the enemy. You can see they've got the garrison from the town at surprisingly high strength. I don't know how they got so many troops in so quickly. But anyway, so the balance bar's in their favour, which I wasn't actually expecting. I thought I might have an advantage here, but I feel like that even if this comes down to a big grind, our heavy infantry will do well, but it's time to put my beliefs on that to the test. Think of what lesser men than you have achieved for the Republic. The world trembles in fear at the sound of our horns. They lash out like cornered dogs when they witness our overwhelming power. All our achievements, they were won by men of common stock, by men found in every city, by men who were content to let their skills merely match the best the enemy could muster. But now consider what you are, what heights you walk above those men who conquered the world. You are the elite. You are the chosen. You exceed the most mighty and famous of our men. The daemons of Polymus would not have been able to punish Carthage for their treachery. But you, my blessed troops, will be able to show that even a man can wield power like a god. So walking through the drizzle, the Massalian troops take up a position at first on top of this massive hill on our side of the battlefield, looking down over the Carthaginian deployment below. We are the attacker, so we're not going to be able to use this hill advantage. We're just going to use it for vision right now. So there's the enemy, their elephants front and center, the rest of their army still forming up, and their reinforcement garrison army coming in on their own flank ready to support them. So the enemy didn't move or do anything to indicate they would come up the hill, so that of course means we're going down. We're going to walk our way down with lots of weird bits of impassable terrain, causing our formation to get messed up on the way down, but eventually I managed to find a nice stable area to set up a proper line right in front of the enemy, very close. We're already under their archer fire, even while we're still forming up here. Their elephants, still curiously standing right in front of their army, are actually providing me with a bit of an opportunity, because of course I can move units forwards to throw javelins at them. So we do just that. 2 of the elephants get taken down, so that's a load off my mind, and then the other 3 berserk. They're coming right towards our lines, but now they're just going to be focused on by even more javelins. Remember, our main line, our legionaries, all can throw javelins, plus we have these pelters, so in front of the line, and indeed we bring down all of the elephants, and that's going to include their general. So that's an absolutely fantastic start to the battle. The enemy's morale going to be hit right away by that, and now we're going to get the fight started properly. Their cavalry almost advanced on my left, but saw my royal hoplites and immediately ran away. A good decision. The enemy's formation has all of the lesser infantry in the front line and the heavy infantry in a really big second line. So that means first we're going to engage with these inferior troops. Our legionaries shouldn't have too much trouble. We've even got a downhill fight in some cases. So right along the line the fights are starting. The enemy's cavalry on my right flank didn't shy away from charging into the Royal Hoplites, and that's going to prove to be a mistake for them. Their numbers already dropping as the Royal Hoplites has hacked them down. Very high stats on that unit. I thought I'd show you their stats exactly. You can see how boosted they are. 40 attack, 80 defense, 65 charge bonus. They're basically a cataphract unit, only in infantry form with virtually unbreakable morale. There is a cap to how many you can have, of course, because they're so good. So I think this is all the Royal Hoplites in the Republic are in this one army. So the rest of the line is starting to engage as the enemy moves up all their secondary troops. So it's going to be a brawl, but a brawl that's quite good for me in terms of the formation, because the enemy are attacking single units on my side with multiple on their side, not using their numbers to their full advantage. On the other side here, the cavalry of the enemy decided to not go for the Royal Hoplites, but go for my Royal Cavalry instead. But these Royal Cav are extremely powerful as well and are able to take them down. So once we've dealt with the enemy's cavalry, we're going to start gaining a definitive cavalry advantage, which will of course make the battle significantly less dangerous because we can maraud about in the enemy's back lines. Here the enemy's cav on our right flank just being finished off by my own cav, freeing up more avenues for infantry and cavalry to start coming around to the enemy's flanks. That is definitely looking good. The enemy's heavy infantry still pressing heavily against us. They may even have a heavy infantry advantage, but my javelineers are helping out with that by just peppering the melee, probably killing some of my own troops. In fact, they definitely are, but they're killing more of the enemy, and it's speeding up the enemy's loss of troops, which is always handy. On our right flank, we're fighting with some of the enemy's less powerful units, like their garrison units. So a couple of those actually routed away, and since they're only small, it didn't make a huge difference, but allowed us to outmaneuver the enemy there and get some good surrounds. At the back of the map, some of my Royal Cavalry managed to chase down some enemy Jav Cavs. That's always nice, since the Jav Cav are faster. That red line of death provides us with a slightly unfair opportunity to take out that unit, so I am going to take it. Meanwhile, the rest of the Cav trying to fight with the enemy's missile units, but some of these guys are actually pelter style units who are heavily armoured, so they can fight okay with cavalry in melee, making things actually a lot slower than I expected. They've also got a single unit of spearmen from their garrison, which is marauding around here, so I'm going to have to be dodging my cavalry out the way. There's only one unit of spears, so we can just outmaneuver them fairly easily. So back on our right flank here, more surrounds coming in as the units freed up from the defeat of the enemy's cavalry join the fight, and that's not going to go well for the enemy at all. We've even got my Gallic mercenaries coming to fight in the line, trying to outflank these low quality spearmen, and they of course are not going to stay in this engagement for long, especially as the elite troops come in to engage. So lots of those guys routing, other guys hanging on, but now they're totally surrounded and outnumbered and outpowered, so they're not going to last forever. So we're still trying with the cavalry to bring down missile units, just dancing around. You can see we're just dodging that spear unit and drawing then these missile units all over the battlefield, and one by one we're able to get successful charges on the missile units, and some of them, the lighter ones, go down right away to those charges, so that's all fine. And those cavalry units then, freed up by the defeat of those missiles, can come in to rear attack the enemy's heavy infantry. The grind still going, and really going in my favour actually. It probably would have ground down to a victory eventually, but with the cavalry rear attack, the enemy rout prematurely, and our men can start killing more of them as they go, and more importantly, freeing up parts of the line. This enemy cavalry unit stuck in the melee in the centre isn't going to do well. So you can see the centre has basically been won, and there goes the right flank, our right flank as well. So that means we now have definitive manoeuvre advantage. You can see from the balance bar that now the enemy don't have much chance, and all these bunched up heavy infantry units who are wasting their strength are going to be really easy to surround. A cavalry rear charge there by the Royal Cavalry, easily damaging those swordsmen, and on the other side the enemy's heavy infantry not hit by cavalry, especially because they had heavy spears in here, but they are being hit by everything else. That of course is grinding them down heavily. Just look how surrounded they are. Most of the units surrounding them, some of the best units in the game, absolutely no chance for these men to escape. So slowly but surely the enemy realise that they're going to have to leave. They actually held on for quite a long time fighting while surrounded and with most of their army dead, because they are pretty high tier units with high morale, but eventually they had to admit defeat, and when they do they realise they are not going to escape. They'll just have to continue fighting for their lives, but the battle now is over. It's a decisive victory for Cleandros. We have repelled Carthage's sudden invasion, so that's an excellent start to the war, but the question now is going to be what else do they have, and what's going to happen when the other powers step in. I hope you'll join me next time to find out. The Carthaginian deception was critically weakened by the fact that many among the Carthaginian elite had not planned for it to become a full-scale invasion. It was believed the army would simply raid Massalian lands and then return, but its commander, Masco, had other ideas. Eager to prove himself after years of training, he convinced his men to capture and occupy the port of Genua. He spent so much time consolidating his position there that the Massalian relief force arrived before Genua was even out of his sight. Even then, he still trusted entirely in his own abilities to overcome traditional strategic wisdom. It was no surprise to his political peers that Masco was among the first to die in battle.